Yinan,
Okay,
now you
I'll
get to take it
share
away.
my. It's loading my presentation. I don't know if it's the same issue for Henry.
Nope, I can see it. Looks good. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. Today, I'll be walking through the statutory and regulatory frameworks that impact ecological resilience in Washington, D.C. and Virginia, with a focus on how these laws affect marginalized agricultural communities. I'll start with how DC laws and regulations affect resilience in four key areas: air quality, pesticide control, zoning and land use, and flood stormwater management. Each topic will be structured the same way. I'll cover the statutes first, then the regulations in practice, and end with where protections for vulnerable agricultural communities. So DC's authority to regulate air pollution comes from the Air Pollution Control Act, which was first enacted in 1984 and later updated. This statute is broad. It gives the city the power to regulate any equipment or activity that emits pollutants into the air through the Department of Energy and Environment. This includes not only large factories or power plants, but also smaller and less obvious sources like soil dehydrators, greenhouses that use fuel burning heaters, or community composting operations. The Air Pollution Control Act empowers the Department of Energy and Environment to design and enforce an air pollution control program that includes setting pollution limits, issuing or denying permits, monitoring emissions, and using administrative penalties when rules are violated. The statute also charges the mayor with developing a comprehensive air pollution plan and maintaining air monitoring systems throughout the district. On top of this, the Climate Commitment Amendment Act of 2022 as a long-term vision. It requires the district to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 60% below 2006 levels by 2030 and to achieve net zero emissions by 2045. DC's air quality regulations are laid out in chapters 1 through 15 of Title 20 in the DC Municipal Regulations. These chapters operationalize the Air Pollution Control Act and are administered by the Department of Energy and Environment. The permitting system is the core enforcement tool. Facilities that emit pollutants, whether they are large industrial operations or smaller facilities, must apply for a permit that outlines their emissions, sources, control technologies, and compliance plans. These permit applications are technical and must show exactly how the operation will meet DC's air quality standards. When the permit is issued, facilities are required to comply with a range of ongoing obligations, including routine emissions monitoring, record keeping, and reporting under Chapter 5. Facilities must keep detailed monitoring records for at least 5 years and submit compliance certifications twice per year. The permits also mandate specific procedures for reporting violations or emergency events that may threaten public health. The Department of Energy and Environment is empowered to ensure compliance through inspections, document reviews, and on-site access. If a facility exceeds its emissions limits or violates its permit conditions, the department can reopen or revoke the permit, impose administrative penalties, or pursue enforcement actions. And more importantly, the enforcement is not limited to the Department of Energy and Environment. The EPA administrator and members of the public may also bring legal actions. These citizen suits provisions allow residents and advocacy groups to help hold polluters accountable when environmental standards are at risk. While the framework is comprehensive on paper, we'll see in the next slide that the way these tools are deployed, especially in underserved neighborhoods, raises concerns for vulnerable agricultural communities. Despite the detailed permitting and enforcement structures we just discovered, DC's air quality laws contain significant gaps, especially when it comes to protecting urban agricultural communities. First, there is no requirement in the Air Pollution Control Act or its implementing regulations for a cumulative impact analysis. That means when the Department of Energy and Environment reviews a permit, it doesn't have to consider how a new source of emissions will interact with existing pollution in the same neighborhood. And second, while the regulations require public notice for Title V permits, they don't mandate proactive, inclusive outreach. There is no built-in requirement for the Department of Environment. There is no built-in requirement for the department to provide multilingual notices, or hold any neighborhood level meetings, or engage communities that might be most affected. And this kind of procedural gap can lead to real-world exclusion, where those most at risk have no voice in decisions about local air quality. The absence of both cumulative impact analysis and inclusive engagement process weakens DC's overall resilience. We'll now turn to now that we've explored how DC regulates air quality, let's turn to another important issue: pesticide control. This is especially relevant for urban farms. Pesticide use in DC is governed by a statute framework that centers on the Pesticide Operations Act of 1977. This law gives the mayor broad authority to oversee every aspect of pesticide regulation, including licensing, certification, usage restrictions, and enforcement. And well, in practice, when the Department of Energy and Environment carries out this authority on the mayor's behalf, the law prohibits anyone from applying or supervising restricted use pesticides without first obtaining a license from the mayor. The department is responsible for assessing each applicant's competence through a written or practical exams. Applicants must also demonstrate a working knowledge of integrated pest management, which prioritizes lower risk, climate resilient pest control methods. Recent legislative updates have modernized this structure. In 2016, the district gave the Department of Energy and Environment power to designate restricted use pesticides beyond those listed federally, and required more detailed post-application reporting near sensitive areas. Then in 2024, the law was amended again to clarify that even individuals applying pesticides on non-commercial land, like urban farms or community gardens, can be subject to certification requirement, especially if the site is near schools, storm drains, or public green space. These updates help the Department of Energy and Environment regulate pesticide use with more precision and flexibility. In DC, all pesticide products must be registered with the Department of Energy and Environment before they can be sold or used. These regulatory requirements are primarily laid out in chapters 22 through 25 of Title 20 of the DC Municipal Regulations. The Department of Energy and Environment reviews each product's label, proposed use, and health claims to evaluate safety risks. The Department of Energy and Environment can also classify products as restricted use if they pose environmental or human health threats. Only certified applicators are allowed to use those restricted use pesticides. Commercial applicators also need a license, liability insurance, and must keep detailed records of every pesticide application, including the product used, the pest targeted, and the treatment area. To enforce these requirements, the Department of Energy and Environment can conduct unannounced inspections, review records, and issue immediate stop sale or stop use orders when public health is at risk. These tools are especially critical during climate-related pest outbreaks. While there is no blanket exemption for small producers, the Department of Energy and Environment may grant case-by-case exceptions if no effective alternatives are available. Applicants must show that the pesticide is necessary to protect health or property, and the Department of Energy and Environment can set conditions to minimize them. This flexible process gives urban farms a limited path to compliance without undermining safety standards. While DC's pesticide laws and regulations provide a solid foundation, several key gaps limited their ability to protect small urban farms and other vulnerable agricultural communities. One major issue is the lack of targeted enforcement. Although the Department of Energy and Environment has strong inspection and penalty powers, there is no requirement to focus oversight in neighborhoods that face disproportionate environmental burdens, like those near floodplains, sewer overflows, industrial corridors. These are precisely the areas where drift or runoff from pesticide use can be most dangerous. Another gap is in transparency. While the law includes notice rules for certain high-risk applications, most general use pesticide spraying doesn't trigger any public notification. That means growers in dense neighborhoods often have no warning when adjacent properties apply pesticides, leaving them unable to protect volunteers, crops, or any nearby residents from exposure. Access is also a barrier. Licensing and certification requirements, including liability insurance and formal training, are often too burdensome for low income agricultural communities and some mutual aid farms. The 2024 amendment expanded regulation of private applicators, but didn't create flexible pathways for those small producers to legally manage pests without breaking the rules. Let's now turn to how land use is governed in the district. Zoning is especially relevant in DC because it directly affects whether urban farms, community gardens, and other climate adaptive uses can operate legally. At the core is the Zoning Act of 1938, which was enacted by Congress before DC had home rule. It's still in force today and is codified at DC Code Section 6-641 03. This statute gives the Zoning Commission power to regulate how land is used, whether for housing, business, industry, or other purposes. It also authorizes the Commission to control the height, bulk, and placement of buildings across the city. Even though the Home Rule Act of 1973 later gave the DC Council broad authority to pass local laws, it did not take away the Zoning Commission's powers under the 1938 Act. Instead, the Home Rule Act preserved zoning as a specialized process with its own procedures and decision makers. The Council can legislate on land use more broadly, but formal zoning decisions must still follow the structure set by the Zoning Act. The Council's key tool for long-term planning is called the Comprehensive Plan, authorized by the Comprehensive Plan Act of 1984. This law empowers the Council to adopt forward-looking policies on issues like food access, green space, and climate resilience. But these policies only get future development. They don't have the force of law unless implemented through the zoning amendments. In other words, the zoning code doesn't have to reflect the plan's overall goals unless the zoning commission explicitly revise the zoning regulations text or the zoning code. Let's now look at some challenges in this zoning system that limit the ability of small urban farms to rebuild resilience during adverse weather events. First, sorry, actually, this is this size. First, zoning rules doesn't recognize urban farming as a primary land use in most residential or mixed use zones. That means farms usually need to go through a special exception process to operate legally. Without official recognition, these farms face uncertainty. They can't count on long-term land use rights, which makes it risky to invest in things like irrigation, soil restoration, or protective infrastructure. And second, structural rules like minimum yard sizes and lot coverage caps under Subtitle C apply to farms just like they do to homes or other buildings. These dimensional standards are rigid and don't make room for things that help manage storm water, like rain gardens or even like some basic growing space. And third, zoning doesn't require farms to consider climate risks when seeking approval. For instance, the green area ratio encourages green space under Subtitle C, but it is based on zone type, not whether a site faces actual flooding or extreme heat risks. Similarly, if an older farm is damaged, it can rebuild without adding stormwater controls, energy upgrades, or other resilience improvements. They can simply restore what was there before, even if it is outdated. And finally, the process for getting zoning relief is complex and costly. Farmers have to apply to the Board of Zoning Adjustment, attend a public hearing, and submit formal plans. For many small agricultural communities, this process can be really burdensome. Let's now take a step back and look at the bigger picture of flood control and stormwater management in the district. This is an area where DC faces serious structural gaps, especially for communities on the front lines of flood impacts. First, DC lacks a single unified statute that mandates citywide flood control or long-term flood resilience. There's no law that requires the district to build protective infrastructure, support post-flood recovery, or prioritize high-risk areas. Instead, flood is a patchwork of regulations, each addressing narrow pieces of the problem without tying them together. In 2020, the city created the Flood Resilience Authority, a new agency meant to coordinate flood mitigation across neighborhoods. But this authority still has no dedicated funding and no binding obligations. It exists more as a planning body than an enforcement tool, and that limits what it can accomplish. And meanwhile, the Department of Energy and Environment plays a major role in flood-related regulations, but mainly through stormwater permits for any land disturbance over 5,000 square feet. They ensure developers install things like rain gardens and retention basins to limit runoff, but they are focused on construction, not on resilience. There's no requirement to evaluate flood risk in the permit process. And that gap is even more visible after disasters. DC doesn't provide any statutory recovery aid for community gardens, urban farms that suffer flood damage. These groups often operate in flood prone zones, but there's no legal mechanism to support them after an actual disaster of storm. Another big issue is jurisdictional overlap. Much of the city's formal flood infrastructure is governed by federal agencies like the Federal Emergency Management Agency or the U.S. Army Corps. That limits DC's ability to act unilaterally, even when it knows which areas are at most risks. Local agencies often have to coordinate across federal rules before taking action. So overall, while DC has flood-related policies in place, they are not cohesive and they don't reach the communities most in need. We will now turn to Virginia. Unlike the DC, Virginia's resilience policies are shaped at the state level and apply across a much broader mix of urban, rural, and agricultural areas. In this part of the presentation, I'll cover four key policy areas that affect how agricultural communities can adapt to adverse weather events. First, we'll look at laws governing flood control, stormwater, and sediment management. Next, we'll explore disaster assistance laws, which define what support is available after major weather events occur. Then we'll examine Virginia's air pollution laws and regulations. These determine which agricultural operations need permits and what kind of emissions are allowed. And finally, we'll introduce Virginia's innovative RAFT program. Virginia regulates stormwater runoff, erosion, and flood impacts through a unified framework created in 2016 when it passed the Virginia Erosion and Stormwater Management Act. This law merged two separate statutes, the Stormwater Management Act and the Erosion and Sediment Control Law, into one integrated program. The goal was to streamline permitting and enforcement, create a single point of oversight, and align both construction fees, erosion controls, and post-construction stormwater management under one system. VISMA is now administered by the Department of Environmental Quality. It applies statewide to nearly all land disturbing activities. Any project that disturbs 10,000 square feet or just 2,500 square feet in the Chesapeake Bay Area must submit erosion and stormwater plans. They must include runoff controls, stabilization measures, and the use of best management practice, such as vegetated buffers or retention basins, to minimize sediment loss and protect water quality. DEQ and local Virginia erosion and stormwater management programs enforce these rules and can issue stop work orders or penalties for violations. Flood control, however, is handled by a different agency, the Department of Conservation and Recreation. Unlike the Department of Environmental Quality, the Department of Conservation and Recreation does not regulate specific sites. Instead, it leads statewide flood planning and distributes funding for resilience projects. One key example is the Community Flood Preparedness Fund created in 2020, which provides grants for flood proofing, voluntary buyouts, and nature-based solutions, especially in underserved areas. In 2024, the General Assembly also tasked the Department of Conservation and Recreation with developing a statewide flood protection master plan to coordinate long-term strategies. So in short, the Department of Environmental Quality manages on-the-ground enforcement and site controls, while The Department of Conservation and Recreation focuses on broader planning and financial support for flood resilience. There are two separate but complementary state rules. Virginia's erosion, stormwater, and flood control regulations are housed together in a single regulative chapter, Title 9 of Virginia Administrative Code, 1825, Chapter 875, but they govern different aspects of water management. Stormwater and sediment control apply directly to construction activities. If a land disturbing project exceeds 10,000 square feet or 2,500 square feet in the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Area, the landowner must submit erosion and stormwater management plans for review. These plans must include structural and non-structural best management practice to control runoff and prevent sediment from leaving the site. And during construction, local programs must inspect active sites at least every 2 weeks and after major storms. After construction, long-term maintenance of stormwater infrastructure must also be verified. Flood control regulations, by contrast, are addressed in different sections and focus on what happens offsite, especially the capacity of downstream channels to handle runoff safely. These rules require developers to predict how much water will flow off a site during specific storm events, such as the 1 year, 2 year, and 10-year storms. To do this, they must use rainfall estimates published by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. The drainage infrastructure must be designed to handle that volume of water safely. For example, natural channels must carry at least a 2-year storm without causing erosion, while man-made systems like pipes and ditches must be able to handle a 10-year storm without overflowing. The regulations also include design and modeling standards for protecting stream banks and conveyance systems. If post-development runoff would exceed safe thresholds, the developers must modify the site design or add detention measures to reduce peak flow. So in short, stormwater rules focus on controlling runoff at the source during and after construction, while flood control provisions ensure that receiving channels streams can handle the increased flow safely. There are still some caps that affect how well the system protects agricultural communities, especially those in flood-prone zones. One issue is the agricultural exemption. Virginia law exempts bona fide agricultural activities from stormwater requirements, but it doesn't clearly define where farming ends and construction begins. For example, building a farm shed or a crossroad may or may not be exempt depending on local interpretation of agricultural activities. A second issue is uneven local enforcement. The Department of Environmental Quality gives local programs flexibility in how they run inspections, including the option to create their own protocols. But this flexibility leads to big differences across counties, especially those with fewer staff or technical resources. And there's no requirement to report enforcement data back to the state, so oversight is fragmented. There's also a design issue. The regulations rely on rainfall models based on past data. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Atlas 40 maps used for flood planning doesn't count for future climate patterns or the growing intensity of storms. That means the infrastructure being approved today may not be enough to protect land from tomorrow's storms. And finally, there's a disconnect between long-term flood planning and short-term permitting. Virginia is working on a statewide flood protection master plan, but there's no requirement for local programs to consider it when reviewing permit applications. That means even in well-known flood zones, approved projects may ignore long-term risks and community resilience goals. We've talked about how Virginia tries to prevent and manage flooding through stormwater, sediment, and flood control regulations, but what happens when prevention isn't enough and disasters still strike? There's where Virginia's disaster assistance framework comes in. Virginia's disaster assistance system, coded under Title 44 of the Virginia Code, is based on the Virginia Emergency Services and Disaster Law of 2000. It gives the governor broad powers to declare a state of emergency, activate the Virginia Emergency Operations Plan, mobilize state and local agencies, and coordinate with federal programs. The law establishes the Virginia Department of Emergency Management as the lead agency for hazard mitigation, disaster response, and continuity of operations planning. The Virginia Department of Emergency Management also administers federal disaster relief funds and works to align local emergency plans with state statewide ones. Local governments must maintain emergency operations plans that cover sheltering, evacuation, and continuity of services for vulnerable communities and populations, and updated the plans at least every 4 years. This requirement was added in 2005 after Hurricane Isabel to improve local preparedness and ensure compliance with federal funding rules. More recent amendments have expanded emergency powers and coordination. For example, in 2020, during COVID-19, the governance authority was broadened to maintain government continuity in public health emergencies, allowing regulatory waivers and flexible resource allocation. As discussed in the last slide, Virginia's disaster assistance system is managed by the Virginia Department of Emergency Management, but it's important to note that it does not operate through binding administrative regulations. Instead, the Virginia Department of Emergency Management relies on the Commonwealth of Virginia Emergency Operations Plan. It is a guidance document adopted under Executive Order 42 by Governor Northam in 2019. The Commonwealth Virginia Emergency Operations Plan serves as the state's operational framework. It assigns responsibilities to state agencies and requires each to maintain internal emergency support for disaster response and recovery. The Virginia Department of Emergency Management and supports implementation of the COVOP by issuing annexes and operational guidance documents. These detail specific functions such as evacuation coordination and emergency communication so that state and local agencies can work from the same operational framework during a disaster. Virginia's disaster assistance laws gave the governor and Virginia Department of Emergency Management broad authority to coordinate disaster relief, but they lack the specifics needed to ensure agricultural communities are fully included in disaster recovery. First, there's no legal requirement for agricultural specific planning. That means no mandate for things like livestock evacuation plans, crop loss mitigation strategies, or protecting soil and drainage systems after a storm. Because there are no codified regulations, localities are bound to integrate agriculture into disaster response operations. And second, the Commonwealth of Virginia Emergency Operations Plan outlines emergency functions, but it does not require agricultural resilience. They have developed annexes. The Department of Emergency Management have developed annexes and internal guidance documents, but these are also not binding and do not set enforceable standards for critical needs like recovering perishable goods or removing agricultural debris. And without binding standards, agencies are not obligated to help agricultural communities with federal aid applications or any infrastructure stabilization after a storm. And finally, Virginia law doesn't require disaster-resistant upgrades when repairing damaged agricultural infrastructure with public funds. That means communities often rebuild to pre-disaster conditions, missing the chance to strengthen resilience against future extreme weather. Of course, floods and storms are not the only environmental risks. Air quality also plays a big role in resilience. Virginia's air quality laws coded under Title 10.1, Chapter 13 of the Virginia Code are overseen by two main agencies, the State Air Pollution Control Board, which sets the standards, and the Department of Environmental Quality, which issues permits, inspects facilities, and enforces the rules. The law defines air pollution broadly. It includes anything that can harm people, animals, crops, or property. That means agricultural emissions like ammonia from livestock and pesticide-related fumes all fall under the state authority. Large operations like industrial scale animal farms may need permits as stationary sources, but smaller or routine farm activities may qualify for exemptions, especially if their emissions are considered low impact or fugitive, meaning air pollutants do not pass through a controlled exhaust system. Virginia also allows case-by-case flexibility through what's called a regulative variance. If a small farm or local agricultural business can show that full compliance would cause an undue hardship, the Department of Environmental Quality can temporarily waive or modify the rules so long as public health isn't seriously threatened. Now is a good time to talk about regional climate agreements that shape Virginia's air quality and resilience policies. Virginia law gives the Department of Environmental Quality the authority to lead climate mitigation. That authority allowed the state to join the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative in 2021. RGGI is a regional cap and invest program in which large facilities that burn fuel to generate electricity must buy allowances for every ton of carbon dioxide they emit. These allowances are sold through quarterly auctions where the highest bidders secure the right to emit. Revenue from these sales goes to the participating states to fund clean energy and climate resilience programs. Between 2021 and 2023, Virginia raised over $827 million from RGGI auctions. 45% funded flood resilience projects. Another 50% supported energy efficiency upgrades for low-income households, with just 5% used for administration cost. Virginia's participation in RGGI has been unstable. In 2022, the Youngkin administration moved to repeal it, arguing that it raised utility bills. Although a Richmond Circuit Court ruled in 2025 that the executive branch cannot unilaterally repeal Virginia's RGGI participation and that Virginia is still legally bound to participate in RGGI. However, the state has not resumed auction participation. No new community flood preparedness fund grants have been issued and rural infrastructure projects have been delayed or canceled. Virginia also takes part in the Ozone Transport Commission, or OTC, a regional body established by Federal Clean Air Act to assist northeastern and mid-Atlantic states in reducing ground-level ozone. Unlike RGGI, OTC is voluntary. It supports coordination, technical modeling, and shared policy tools, but doesn't generate funding. Virginia's air emission regulations for stationary sources are codified in Chapter 80 of Title 9 of the Virginia Administrative Code. The process begins with pre-construction review. Each permit contains emission limits and operation conditions, for example, fuel restrictions, equipment operating parameters, or hours of operations. Monitoring, reporting, and record keeping are also built into the permit. Operators must log fuel uses, production, and control device operations within required timelines. Notably, many agricultural sources are exempt from these requirements because they are classified as non-point sources under the regulations, meaning pollutants like PM 2.5, ammonia, and nitrous oxide from farm operations often go untracked. And for greenhouse gases, Virginia follows federal thresholds. Only sources emitting more than 100,000 tons carbon dioxide equivalent annually require major permits and must apply best available control technology. Virginia's air quality framework leaves a few gaps that impact rural and agricultural communities. First, the permitting system doesn't reach many agricultural sources. Activities like tilling, manure spreading, and pesticide spraying are classified as non-point sources, so they're not required to get permits. Second, even when pollution comes from identifiable farm sources, exemptions allow certain activities like open burning, land clearing, to proceed without permits. That means emissions from multiple exempt operations can overlap, especially in rural areas. Because these sources don't have to monitor or report emissions, regulators collect the data to identify or target enforcement. And third, greenhouse gas rules only apply to very large emitters. Small farms, even if they produce high impact gases like methane or nitrous oxide, are left out entirely. And fourth, the variance process is hard for small farmers to navigate, and rural areas often lack enough air monitors to qualify for non-attainment status that would trigger stronger protections. And fifth, state law stops Virginia from setting stricter standards for wood burning stoves, and then the federal EPA's 2014 rules. These stoves are common in rural agricultural homes and emit particulates that harm respiratory health. And finally, Virginia's withdrawal from the RGGI has frozen the fund, halting projects that supported rural resilience to both flood and air quality risks. So far, we focused on existing laws and regulations. Now, I want to close Virginia's section by looking at a forward-thinking, community-driven program that helps localities plan for climate risks, such as flooding, sea level rise, and other adverse weather events before they become disasters. This is called the Resilience Adaptation Facility, RAFT. It's also commonly referred as the RAFT program. So RAFT is run through a partnership between the Institute for Engagement and Negotiation at the University of Virginia, the Institute for Coastal Adaptation Resilience at Old Dominion University, and the Center for Coastal Studies at Virginia Tech. The former Virginia Coastal Policy Center at the William and Mary Law School participated in this partnership from 2015 until June 2023. The process has three phases. First is the RAPT scorecard, which reads over 100 indicators across floodplain management, infrastructure, public health, governance, and equity. Second is a workshop bringing together community leaders, residents, and technical experts to set adaptation priorities. And third is a 1 year implementation period where RAPT provides technical support, resource connections, and grant assistance. Since 2017, RAFT has reached over 25 jurisdictions through 6 regional cohorts. The 2017 through 2018 pilot project served as the proof of concept, testing both the RAPT scorecard and the workshop model. The following year, the 2018 through 2019 Eastern Shore cohort worked with Northampton County, Accomack County, and the town of Chincoteague to address pressing issues like agricultural drainage, sea level rise, and failing septic systems. In 2019 through 2020, the Northern Neck cohort assisted towns such as Kilmarnock and Montrose in tackling shoreline erosion and overcoming zoning barriers that hindered resilience measures. The 2021 through 2022 Middle Peninsula cohort, which included Matthews and Middlesex counties, focused on chronic tidal flooding and a lack of green infrastructure. From 2022 to 2024, the Crater Region cohort supported Petersburg and Sussex County as they worked to address stormwater overflows, aging infrastructure, and extreme heat. And running in parallel, the Virginia Indian Tribes Pilot Project collaborated with tribal governments to identify cultural-specific climate risks and integrate indigenous knowledge into resilience planning. RAFT isn't written into law, but it operates through state and federal funding, primarily Virginia's Coastal Zone Management Program grants from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and the $450,000 appropriation from the Virginia General Assembly for 2024 through 2026. This funding supports technical assistance, community workshops, and follow-up planning support. Since 2017, RAFT has reached more than 25 localities. Communities have used RAFT plans to improve their scores in the Federal Emergency Management Agency's community rating system. It is a program that rewards communities for reducing flood risk by lowering residents' flood insurance premiums. Others have used RAFT plans to secure grants from the Community Flood Preparedness Fund. However, participation is voluntary, so only selected or self-nominating communities receive help. And while RAFT guides the planning process, it doesn't pay for construction. So projects like drainage upgrades or living shorelines still need separate grant funding. For agricultural reasons, RAFT's real value lies in pinpointing climate and flood risks that threaten agricultural communities and rural infrastructure, promoting nature-based solutions like riparian buffers and green stormwater retrofits, and ensuring that local residents and landowners directly shape resilience priorities. That concludes my overview of DC and Virginia statutes, regulations, and resilience. I'm happy to take any questions you may have. Thank you for your time and attention today.
Thank you so much, Yinan. For folks who are joining us a little late, we are running a little behind. I do think we probably have time maybe for one question, and I believe we still have a group small enough that if somebody has a burning question for Yinan and you want to unmute yourself, please go ahead. Covered a lot of ground, Yinan.
Yeah, I tried to cover like all of my research into this like presentation.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, you covered so much that we don't have any questions. Thank you so much. We really appreciated and enjoyed your presentation.